ever spent an entire day, like, totally stuck in traffic. I mean, can you imagine 5 days straight, barely moving, like, a mile a day?
Oh, wow.
That's what thousands of drivers in China faced back in August 2010 on this highway called the China National Highway 110.
Oh, yeah.
And today, we're going to do a deep dive into this infamous 100-kilometer parking lot.
Okay.
We're using the Wikipedia article on this just absolutely insane traffic jam. And we're going to find out, like, how did this even happen? What was it like being stuck in it?
Right.
And, like, what can we learn from this crazy transportation nightmare?
Yeah, it's a really interesting event. It's kind of a demonstration of all these things coming together, like infrastructure and economics and human behavior.
So, okay, first let's just try to grasp the massive scale of this thing.
Yeah.
This wasn't like a few cars backed up. We're talking about like over 60 miles
Wow.
of bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Just crazy.
Can you like give us a sense of what caused this crazy gridlock?
Well, Highway 110 was already under a lot of strain at the time just because the Chinese economy was growing so fast.
Yeah.
And so the traffic was increasing something like 40% every year.
Wow.
Way more than the infrastructure could actually handle.
So it's like a highway that's just totally bursting at the seams.
Yes. Exactly.
Was that like the only thing that was going on, though?
No, not at all. At the same time, they were doing road construction.
Oh, no.
And that actually cut the highway's capacity in half.
Oh, wow.
So like 50% reduction.
So you've got like tons of traffic and then they're like, let's make the road smaller.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Recipe for disaster.
Total disaster.
Exactly. And then to make things even worse, there was a huge increase in coal trucks
Uh-oh.
going to Beijing because coal production in Inner Mongolia had gone way up.
Okay.
And there weren't enough trains to transport it all.
Ah.
So everybody was using trucks.
Yeah.
And that just flooded Highway 110.
So you have booming traffic, you have limited capacity,
Right.
and then all of a sudden this giant surge in demand.
Yeah, a perfect storm.
A perfect storm.
Yeah.
The Wikipedia article even mentions this theory that some of the coal trucks, they were overloaded. And they were like, you know what? Let's take Highway 110
Right.
to avoid like a checkpoint
Right.
on a different route. Do you think that like actually happened?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, when you've got economic pressure and these strict rules, people will always try to get around them.
Yeah.
But it just shows how important it is to have strong infrastructure
Right.
that can adapt
Right.
when things change.
When things change like that. Okay, now I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to be stuck in this huge traffic jam.
Yeah.
The article says that some drivers were there for days, barely moving.
Right.
So, like, paint us a picture. What was life like inside this 100-kilometer parking lot?
Well, it was total chaos.
Yeah.
Thousands of cars just idling, drivers sleeping in their cars, tempers flaring. I mean, just imagine being stuck
Yeah.
in your car,
Yeah.
going nowhere for days.
I would go crazy.
Exhausted, bored,
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
just terrible.
Just thinking about it is like claustrophobic. Did
Yeah.
people just like sit there and wait it out?
Some did, but other people got creative.
Oh,
The people who lived in the area saw an opportunity
okay.
to sell things that people needed,
Right.
like water, instant noodles, things like that.
Okay.
But they charged a lot.
Well, yeah, you've got a captive market.
Yeah.
Supply and demand.
Exactly.
Exactly.
What kind of markups are we talking?
A bottle of water would usually cost like 1 yuan.
Yeah.
They were selling them for 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like, talk about paying for convenience.
Yeah, for sure. It shows what happens in these kinds of situations.
Yeah.
It's amazing how people adapt.
Yeah.
And find ways to, meet a need. But it also makes you think about people taking advantage
Right.
of a bad situation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's a
Yeah.
complex issue.
Yeah. So how did the authorities finally like untangle this monster traffic jam?
It took a lot of effort.
Yeah.
They decided to prioritize the trucks carrying essential goods into Beijing,
Okay.
especially at night
Okay.
when the traffic was lighter,
Okay. Yeah.
and that helped to clear things up.
So like strategic traffic management.
Exactly.
What else?
Well, they also asked the trucking companies to like hold back for a while
Okay.
or to find different routes
Right.
just to take the pressure off Highway 110.
Right.
And eventually, those things, together with the fact that the coal truck surge kind of died down, the jam finally cleared up.
It's amazing to me that something as simple as driving can become so complex
Yeah.
when you add in all these things. Infrastructure, economics, even human behavior.
It really is. This traffic jam is such a great example of how all these things are connected
Yeah.
and what can happen when you push those systems too far.
It's a little scary, to be honest.
Yeah, it is.
What were the long-term impacts of this traffic jam? Like, what were the consequences?
Well, obviously, there were economic losses.
Right.
delays, disruptions in the supply chain, but it also showed how vulnerable China's transportation infrastructure was at the time.
Like it wasn't equipped to handle that massive surge in traffic.
Exactly. It really highlighted the need for China to invest in expanding and modernizing its roads.
So this was kind of like a wake-up call.
Exactly. It made policymakers and planners realize that they had to deal with the challenges of such rapid growth
Yeah.
and find sustainable solutions to keep up with it.
Yeah. It's amazing how one event can have such a big impact.
Yeah, it is.
Now, you mentioned the economic fallout, but what about the people? This must have been so stressful.
Oh, absolutely. For a lot of these drivers, it wasn't just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
This was a big disruption to their lives, their work. They lost time, money, sleep. They were just constantly stressed and frustrated.
It reminds you that traffic jams aren't just some abstract problem. They really affect people's lives.
They really do. And this particular jam showed how important it is to be resilient
Right.
and adaptable.
Take a crash course in patience.
Exactly, exactly.
So did this jam change anything in China? Like their infrastructure, their transportation policies?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It sparked a bunch of initiatives to improve their transportation.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, they really focused on expanding and upgrading their highways.
Okay.
Added more lanes, improved the surfaces, put in better traffic management systems.
So like a major overhaul.
Exactly, a major overhaul. And it wasn't just roads.
Okay.
They invested in public transportation too,
Right.
like high-speed rail and subways in cities.
A more diverse approach.
Exactly, taking some of the burden off the roads.
Right.
And they've kept investing. China's now a global leader in infrastructure
Wow.
and transportation innovation. And it all started with that traffic jam. It
Yeah.
was a reminder that progress means adapting
Yeah.
and learning from your mistakes.
Wow. It's remarkable how one single event can have such a lasting impact. It makes you wonder if similar things are happening in other parts of the world. Maybe not on such a massive scale, but,
Yeah.
similar things.
Yeah, it's a good point. While that 100-kilometer parking lot might be unique in scale, the things that caused it aren't.
Right.
I mean, you've got rapid urbanization, more and more people owning cars, and infrastructure that can't keep up. Those are things that lead to congestion,
Yeah.
and they're happening all over the world.
So it's not just a problem for China or developing countries.
Right.
Even in developed countries with good infrastructure, we see traffic jams all the time.
All the time. Think about holiday travel, big sporting events,
Right.
even rush hour in a big city.
Hmm.
Those all create bottlenecks, slowdowns, frustration.
And I bet those smaller jams still have consequences for the economy.
Absolutely. Lost productivity, wasted fuel, delayed shipments.
Right.
And then there's the environmental impact of all those cars just sitting there.
Right. Right. So if we're talking about vulnerability, are there any places in the world that seem particularly at risk for these kinds of traffic nightmares?
I think any rapidly growing city is a potential trouble spot. Places where the population and car ownership are booming, but the infrastructure isn't developing fast enough.
So it's not just about how many cars are on the road, but the roads themselves.
That's exactly. Think of it like a bathtub. If you keep pouring water in but don't make the tub bigger, it's going to overflow.
Yeah,
Same thing with transportation systems.
that's a good analogy. So how do we prevent these things from happening? Is it just a matter of building more roads and highways?
Well, more roads are part of the solution, but it's not that simple. We need to look at transportation systems as a whole.
What do you mean by holistically?
It means going beyond just making roads bigger. We need to think about other ways to get around, investing in good public transit systems, making it easier and safer for people to bike and walk, even looking into new technology like self-driving cars.
So like diversifying transportation, taking some pressure off the roads. That's a pretty big change in thinking.
It is, but it's becoming more and more important as our cities grow and transportation needs get more complicated.
You mentioned technology. What role do you see that playing in fixing traffic congestion?
Technology could be a game changer. We have things like real-time traffic monitoring, intelligent routing systems, even apps like Waze that use data from drivers to help people avoid traffic.
So it's like using data and algorithms to outsmart traffic.
Exactly. And as these technologies get better and better, we'll be able to optimize traffic flow even more, reduce congestion, and cut down on travel time.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. It's like using high tech to solve a very human problem.
It is, but we can't forget about the human element. even with the best infrastructure and technology, traffic jams can still happen because of human behavior.
What do you mean?
Things like rubbernecking, aggressive driving, tailgating, not paying attention, those things can create bottlenecks and affect the entire flow of traffic.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of rubbernecking a time or two. It's hard not to look.
It's human nature, but it can have a real impact on traffic. If everyone slows down to look at an accident, it can cause traffic to back up for miles.
So it's not just about building better roads and using fancy apps, it's about being more aware drivers.
Exactly. We need to think about our own driving habits and how they might be contributing to congestion. Simple things like keeping a safe distance from other cars, avoiding sudden lane changes, being courteous. These things can really make a difference.
So we need a bit of a cultural shift away from that me-first attitude when we're driving.
I agree. We need to think about driving as a shared responsibility.
Yeah,
We all need to work together to keep traffic moving smoothly and safely.
I like that shared responsibility. It's
Yeah.
like we're all in this together,
Mm-hmm.
literally.
Yeah.
But what about those times when traffic jams are unavoidable, like during a natural disaster or a major accident? What can we do to help people who are stuck?
That's a really important point and one that we often forget about. The first and most important thing is clear and timely communication.
Okay.
Drivers need accurate information about traffic conditions, detours, estimated delays.
So they can make good decisions about their routes or whether to wait it out.
Exactly. And that information needs to be available in a lot of different ways, like radio, GPS, smartphone apps, electronic road signs.
So it's like a lifeline for those stuck in traffic, letting them know what's happening and what to expect.
Exactly. It can really help reduce stress and frustration, but communication is only one part of the solution. We also need to think about providing basic services for people stuck in these situations.
Like what kinds of services?
Things like portable toilets, water stations, maybe even food trucks. Especially when delays are really long, having these basic necessities can make a huge difference in how comfortable people are and their morale.
Yeah. It's like creating a temporary rest stop right there in the traffic jam.
Exactly. We need to remember that people stuck in these situations still have basic needs, and we should try our best to meet them. It's a matter of basic human decency.
Well said. Are there any countries or cities that are doing a good job of addressing traffic congestion and taking care of people stuck in traffic?
There are some good examples. Cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam have invested a lot in making biking safer and easier, which gives people a good alternative to cars.
Right.
Singapore has a system where they charge drivers more when traffic is heavy,
Okay.
which encourages people to drive during off-peak hours or take public transport.
So they're using technology and pricing to change driving behavior.
Exactly. And London has a congestion charge zone in the city center. That's helped to reduce traffic and improve air quality.
Okay.
And many cities are testing smart traffic management systems that use sensors and algorithms to make traffic flow better in real time.
So there's a lot of innovation happening in transportation.
Yeah, there is. And it's great to see cities all over the world coming up with creative solutions to these really tough problems.
It makes you think about what the future of transportation will be like.
Right.
All the advances in technology and this growing focus on sustainability, it feels like we're about to see a big change.
I agree. We're at a really important point. The choices we make today are going to have a huge impact on how we get around in the future.
So what do you see happening in the future of transportation? What are the key things we should be watching?
Well, I think we're going to keep moving towards more sustainable transportation. There'll be more focus on public transit, biking, and walking. Electric vehicles will become more and more common, so we'll rely less on fossil fuels.
And what about self-driving cars? They seem to be getting a lot of attention.
Self-driving cars have the potential to completely change transportation. They could make it safer, more efficient, and accessible for everyone.
But there's still some big challenges to overcome before they're everywhere.
Right. We still need to figure out things like safety regulations and public acceptance, but I do think they'll become a normal part of transportation eventually.
It's a really exciting time to be thinking about the future of transportation. But I think we need to remember that technology isn't the only answer.
Right.
We also have to think about the human side of things. How will people adapt to these new ways of getting around? How do we create a system that works for everyone?
I totally agree. It's about finding a balance between innovation, making transportation available to everyone, and making it sustainable. And it's a challenge that will require governments, industry leaders, and everyday people to work together.
Yeah. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from what causes traffic jams to possible solutions and the future of transportation. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to the 100-kilometer parking lot. It was such a dramatic event, it makes you wonder if we've actually learned anything from it. Like, are we any better at handling something like that today?
It's a good question. I mean, we have seen a lot of progress in infrastructure, traffic management tech, even more awareness of sustainable transportation. So in a lot of ways, we're definitely more prepared than we were back in 2010.
Really?
But the things that caused that traffic jam in the first place are still around. And some of them are even worse now.
Okay.
Like, we have way more urbanization than ever before, more people owning cars all over the world, and supply chains are just getting more and more complex.
So it's like we're always trying to catch up.
Exactly. We're making things better, but the problems are changing and getting bigger too.
It's kind of the paradox.
Yeah.
We have more knowledge, more tech, more tools than ever,
Yeah.
but we could still see these huge disruptions.
Right, because transportation systems are so complex and everything's connected. It's not just roads and bridges. You have to think about human behavior, the economy, even politics.
Right.
One little problem in one area can have a ripple effect on the whole system.
Yeah, the 100-kilometer parking lot was like the perfect example of that. It wasn't just one thing that caused it. It was a bunch of things happening all at once.
Exactly, a perfect storm. And that's why it's so hard to know when and where the next big disruption will happen.
Yeah.
It could be a natural disaster, a big accident, a cyber attack, even just a huge surge in travel during the holidays.
So it's not about trying to guess exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
It's more about understanding those weaknesses in the system
Yeah,
and being ready for different things that could happen.
exactly. Think of it like preparing for an earthquake. You can't know exactly when or where it'll hit,
Right?
but you can build things to withstand it.
Yeah.
Same idea with transportation. We need to build in resilience, backups, and the ability to adapt.
That makes sense, but where do we even start? These systems are so huge and complicated, it seems overwhelming.
It's a big job, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible. I think the first thing is to think about transportation planning in a more holistic way, more integrated. We need to stop thinking in silos and start looking at how all the different modes of transportation are connected.
Right.
How land use affects things, how technology can help optimize traffic flow.
So we need to bring together experts from different areas, like urban planners, engineers, data scientists, even psychologists.
Exactly. We need all those people working together to create a transportation system that's more efficient, more resilient, and sustainable.
So it's a problem that needs a team effort to solve.
Mm-hmm.
What about governments? What can policymakers do to help with this?
Governments have a really important role. They set the rules for transportation planning and decide where the money goes.
Right.
They can encourage people to use sustainable transportation, invest in things like public transit, promote those smart traffic management systems we talked about,
Yeah.
and even make policies that lead to better land use.
So it's about creating an environment that encourages innovation and helps people and businesses make good choices for the whole transportation system.
Exactly. We need to move away from just focusing on cars and find a more balanced and sustainable approach.
But what about us? What can we do as drivers and commuters to help make the transportation system better?
There are actually a lot of things we can do. First, think about your driving habits. Be a defensive driver, keep a safe distance from other cars, don't get distracted, and be nice to other drivers. Those little things can really add up and make a difference in traffic flow.
So be aware of how we drive. What else?
Try not to drive alone all the time. Think about carpooling, public transportation, biking, or walking.
Right.
Even small changes in how you get around can make a difference.
And of course, know what traffic is like before you go and plan your route.
Absolutely. Use those navigation apps, check traffic reports, and be ready to change your route if you need to.
It sounds like there's a lot we can all do to create a better transportation future.
Yeah.
But as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm thinking about the 100-kilometer parking lot again. It was such a crazy event,
It really was.
but it also showed how resilient people can be.
That's true. Even with all the frustration and uncertainty, people found ways to adapt, help each other out, and even find some humor in the situation. It shows that we can handle tough situations
Yeah.
and find hope even when we're stuck in gridlock.
I love that. Okay, I think that's a good place to end this deep dive.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And to all our listeners, we hope you learned something new about traffic jams, what we can learn from them, and why it's important to work together to build a better transportation system for everyone.
Absolutely. Safe travels, everyone.
Makes you wonder, Have we really learned from it? Are we
Oh.
any better equipped now to deal with a transportation mess that big?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, we've definitely made progress. Look at infrastructure, traffic management tech, even just a greater understanding of needing things like sustainable transportation. So in a lot of ways, yeah, we're better off than we were back in 2010.
I feel like there's a but coming.
But those same things that caused that epic traffic jam, they're still out there. And some are even worse.
Okay. Like what?
Urbanization. It's happening at a crazy rate. More people all over the world are owning cars, and those supply chains, they just keep getting more complex.
So we're always playing catch up.
Pretty much. We're making progress, but the challenges are changing too, getting bigger.
It's like we have more knowledge, better tech, more tools than ever,
Right.
but those massive disruptions could still happen.
Exactly. And that's because transportation systems, they're so incredibly complex. Everything's connected. It's not just the physical stuff, the roads and bridges. Human behavior matters, the economy, even politics.
Right. Hadn't thought about that.
Even a small hiccup in one part can ripple through the whole system.
Like the 100-kilometer parking lot was a perfect example of that.
Exactly. It wasn't just one thing that caused it. It was everything happening at once.
Right, right. That perfect storm.
Yep.
And that's what makes it so hard to predict, right?
Absolutely. We can't just say, oh, it'll happen here or on this date. It could be a natural disaster, a huge accident, some kind of cyber attack, heck, even just a surge in travel because it's a holiday.
So it's less about pinpointing the exact event, more about understanding where the system is weak.
Exactly. And making sure it can handle whatever comes at it.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we even begin? These systems are so huge.
It's a big task, no doubt, but we can do it. The first thing, I think, is to change how we think about transportation planning. It has to be more holistic, more integrated.
Okay, what does that mean?
We can't just look at roads or trains in isolation. We have to think about how all the different ways of getting around are connected, how the way we use land affects things, how technology can make traffic flow better.
So like bringing different experts together.
Exactly. Urban planners, engineers, the transportation folks, data scientists, even psychologists. All those people working together for a system that's more efficient, resilient, sustainable. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a big problem that needs a big team. But what about the government? What can policymakers do?
Governments are really important here. They set the stage, decide where the money goes. They can offer incentives for using sustainable transportation, invest in public transit, push for those smart traffic management systems.
Right.
They can even make policies that encourage better land use.
So creating an environment where good choices are easier for both people and businesses.
Exactly. Moving away from just being car-centric towards something more balanced and sustainable.
But what about us regular folks? What can we do as drivers, commuters, to help make things better?
A lot, actually. First off, be aware of your driving habits. Defensive driving, safe following distance, don't get distracted, be courteous. Those little things, they all add up.
So being a better driver, basically. What else?
Don't drive alone if you don't have to. Carpool, take public transport, bike, walk. Even small changes help.
And of course, checking traffic before we go, planning our routes.
Absolutely. Use those apps, check the reports, be ready to change your plans if needed.
Sounds like we can all do our part, both individually and as a community, for a better transportation future. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking back to that 100-kilometer parking lot. It was chaotic, sure,
Yeah,
but it also shows how resilient people can be.
absolutely. All that frustration, the uncertainty, people still found ways to adapt, help each other out, even find some humor in it all. It shows we can deal with tough situations.
Yeah,
We can find hope, even when we're stuck in gridlock.
that's a great point. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you have a better understanding now of just how complex traffic jams can be, what we can learn from them, and why we need to work together for a more sustainable transportation future. Until next time, safe travels, everyone.